Sridham Prabhu asked me to speak about devotee care. For some reason, maybe because I just wrote a book or something like that, I don't know, people connect me with devotee care. I still haven't figured out really the reason why. The book was basically just describing my realizations from Radha Gopinath Mandir, and it was something that was really my own initiative, but just simply my observations of my experiences back in the early 1990s, I think it was, when I was writing and speaking. And wherever I would speak my realizations about Radha Gopinath Mandir, and then they were recorded and somehow they were put into a book. So it's not me who actually wrote the book, or it's all of you who wrote the book. And somehow I got some credit for it, because probably because most people were attracted to the title of the book, but taking care of Krishna's devotees, I guess it was a catchy title and people thought, wow, that sounds like a good topic. And then probably once they read the book, you could see how little realization I have on the topic. But anyways, and even in Ukraine, it was Radhanath Maharaj who came there in 1997 and initiated devotee care when I invited him to come to speak about, I think it was 1997, was it? Yeah. Invited him to speak. His lectures were recorded on videos, were distributed throughout many places. And the only thing I did was try to repeat what he had spoken and convince the devotees of its importance. And then Achyuta Priya Prabhu took over and took care of the rest. And I've just been watching it, and somehow still people think I can qualify to speak on such a deep topic as devotee care. But I'll say a few words, and I'll speak from this verse from the Bhagavatam, which is something which I find very, as I said, very relevant to my own service in attempting to take care of devotees, because the verse actually explains how one can think of the welfare of others. It's a prayer by Prahlad Maharaj, well-known prayer from the 5th canto of the Bhagavatam. And he offers his prayers to Lord Nrsingadev for good fortune throughout the universe of all living entities. And of course, Prahlad Maharaj is certainly someone who could easily be accredited with the title of as a devotee, one who's caring not only for devotees but for all living beings. His nature of his prayer was so selfless, and that it has an impression on me, at least, this verse, and especially Srila Prabhupada's commentary about how to think of others' welfare. And thinking of others' welfare sometimes doesn't come so spontaneously, it doesn't come so easy, and sometimes even when we try to think of others' welfare and we expect a certain type of reciprocation from it and we don't get it, it becomes even more difficult to think of others' welfare, because then we begin to think about, I'm not getting any reciprocation, and people have false expectations about what real I'm supposed to do for their welfare, and sometimes it becomes very frustrating to think of their welfare when they expect me to do something which I'm not really neither inclined to do, capable of doing, and shouldn't be doing. And then we start withdrawing from a welfare, thinking of the welfare of others mentality, and start thinking about maybe I should be doing something else. This is what I confront a lot sometimes when I travel to different places. I know Sri Dham Prabhu goes to Hungary, and when I was in Hungary in, I think it was 2000, it's either 2006, 2007, my health was really bad. And the GBC had sent me an order. Actually, the chairman of the GBC got a full unanimous GBC decision for me to take a leave of absence. And then Shiva Maharaj invited me to New Vajradham and invited me to come and to get Radha Shyama Sundar's mercy, to come and recuperate there. And while I was spending some time, I stayed maybe quite a few months. Maybe at that time it was there maybe 5, 6 straight months. And then while I was there, Shiva Maharaj said, you know, why don't you try to help get the devotee care going in Hungary? And you know, while you're here, maybe you can initiate something and try to get the concept fixed in the minds of the devotees and see what you can do. But then I had a good frame of reference because I was already feeling like really cared for by Shiva Maharaj. So it really helped, you know, because it was sort of like, it was just my ability to speak about devotee care was based on my own subjective experience of really being cared for by my godbrother, who literally not only invited me to New Vajradham and just said, you know, look Maharaj, just don't worry about doing anything, was attentive to my personal needs, and even at one point he threatened to take my passport away from me so I wouldn't travel. And so it made it a lot easier to speak about devotee care because all I had to do was, again, here I was. I could speak about being cared for, you know. So, and it became my impetus and my initiative for planting the seed for the devotee care program in Hungary. And then I invited Sri Dhamma Kishori to come, and once in a while I go and I speak to the devotees in Hungary. But one of the things oftentimes, it comes up quite not constantly, but frequently when I visit there is, you know, how do you keep on doing this? you know, where's the point where you have to make a decision like, is this really worth it? Is this really, you know, what I should be doing? And the last time when I visited there, just a few weeks ago, I think it was end of January. Actually, it was just before I came here. It was January 30th. I met with the counselors, and several of them were. One of the first question I was asked was, trying to phrase it in a way that is actually asked. The devotee asked, where are we supposed to get our enthusiasm for this service? Of course, I gave them the famous, was it 20-60-20 quote? I gave them the 20-60-20 quote. And they say, well, we heard that before. And then I found myself speaking and reminding them, don't you remember we've talked about this before? And I said that actually if we expect to get reciprocation from taken care of, and if we don't get what we expect to get from that, then we may lose our enthusiasm. But actually, if we can be more detached and fixed on this higher order that's coming from above, and remain fixed on the superior order, which is actually the source of our shelter, the source of our inspiration, and it will actually become the source of reciprocation, you'll find yourself quite capable of going on without getting what you're expecting from the people that you're taking care of. Because they had this same question, like people have false expectations of what it means. Devotee care means that they have to take care of my problems. And if they don't take care of my problems, they're not really caring for me. So then we had a whole discussion about how to know what problems to take ownership for and what problems not to take ownership for, because we're really not supposed to deal on that level. And because it's not just devotee care, but it's spiritual care. So that's anyways, that's a topic that from time to time, and I don't know if that's relevant here, but I don't think it is relevant. Maybe it is to some degree, but I think all of you have the higher order, and you have, I'm sure you have a clear understanding of whose desires taking care of devotees for all of you really is. And that if you actually connect yourself with those instructions, and because you've all been adequately taken care of, certainly you can give shelter, because oftentimes I explain, as I also explained in the book, that nobody can give shelter who's not sheltered. It's just not, can't do it. It's false, it's an illusion, and therefore being sheltered is a significant qualification for giving it. And then of course we have to know how to find shelter, and we have to make sure we see that it's available and it becomes accessible to us to the degree that we know ourselves know how to find shelter. And then when we know how to find shelter from above in the same way, then we can teach that to the devotees under our care, how we find shelter. And then it really, something starts to gel, something starts to work. That shelter is not when somebody's going to come and take care of each one of our small problems, but is actually going to give us spiritual shelter. And the whole basis of spiritual shelter, of course, is faith, Shraddha. And the best way to give shelter is by ourselves having strong faith and by giving strong faith to others. I'll get to the verse in a minute. Something I just wanted to share also on this topic. I think it's relevant. That 2014 for me was a year I decided to really focus on studying about Prabhupada. And I read the whole 6 volumes of Prabhupada Leelamrita again, and I read I read every single book I could get my hands on about Prabhupada. Miracle on Second Avenue. I read Achyutananda's books, Blazing Sadhus. I read all the following Srila Prabhupada series. I read all the devotees' commentaries on Yadobhara's following the Srila Prabhupada series. I really, for some reason, it was just like my focus. And I think it was, to some, the catalyst, I think, was in Mayapur last year when I read I can't remember what it was written by Ravindra Swarup Prabhu, the document about Srila Prabhupada, the Founderacharya book, that's right, the Founderacharya. Anyways, when I read that, and then I became inspired to read and to speak a lot about Prabhupada. And I really focused on the early years, 1960, 66. I always listen to, my favorite lectures are 1966 lectures on 2nd Avenue, Prabhupada speaking from Chaitanya Charitamrita. And I listened to those lectures again too. And I've also been listening to something very wonderful I'll share this with you. I discovered that on a website was all the conversations Srila Prabhupada had in 1977, beginning from January right up until the day he departed. And there was 367 files there. They were all the uncut, unedited conversations. And you can, on the site, there is a place where you can go, and they're freely available, but you can download one at a time. But somehow I found this software that goes onto a site and just takes everything. So I decided why one at a time. So I took them all 367 files, and I listened to them every day, because most of those 367 files are just conversations. Prabhupada didn't give that many lectures in 1977, just conversations. And between listening to those conversations in 77, listening to the 66 lectures, and reading all these books, I've tried to really focus on Prabhupada's method of distributing Krishna consciousness. How is it that he inculcated so much faith, so much desire to please him? Prabhupada oftentimes quoted that verse, Yena tena pakarina mana Krishna navesha, that is the duty of the spiritual master. He would translate as saying this, the duty of the spiritual master to somehow or other get to the disciple to think of Krishna, and everything else, all the rules and regulations can come later. And when you read, and when I was studying 1966, I was really meditating on that verse, and how Prabhupada really, his method of distributing Krishna consciousness, of course, was giving Krishna. And because Krishna was so attractive, of course, people became so attracted. But there was something else that I began to cross-reference from these different books, which really captured my attention about Prabhupada's method of distributing Krishna consciousness. And that was especially in the early years, and I really picked up on in Mukunda Maharaj's book, Miracle on 2nd Avenue, although it's definitely there in Prabhupada Lilamrita also. But as I was reading about Prabhupada's early days in New York and his struggles, and his, beginning from when he left Butler, Pennsylvania, and then he went to New York, and then he went to Uptown, and the difficulties he had uptown when all his things were stolen, when he was staying in that room in the Uptown. And he was staying in 2 separate rooms. He was staying in the ashram of Dr. Mishra's ashram, and then he felt compromised in Dr. Mishra's ashram, and he moved up into a little room upstairs. And then when he stayed in that little room upstairs, some of his things were stolen, and Prabhupada could understand that the janitor had stolen his things, and then it was recommended that he go down to the Lower East Side and stay in a loft with that, I can't remember what his name was. It wasn't his actual name, but and of the crazy person who was taking LSD. And Prabhupada was staying in the loft there with the crazy person. And then, of course, when it became too much, Prabhupada walked out, took his things, walked out, stepped out into the street, didn't know where he was going to go. And he was picked up and brought into another loft of Karl Jurgen's. And in that loft, Karl Jurgen's wife felt very threatened by Prabhupada's presence, and she was, telling, and it's interesting the way it was described, that it's a loft, and a loft is just one room, and it's described how Prabhupada was staying in the loft, in that one room, with the husband and wife who were staying together. And he was on the sofa, and they were, at night, it was described how they were up a good portion of the night. And usually if they were up a good portion of the night in bed, and Prabhupada's on the sofa, you can imagine what Prabhupada was going through there. And this is all, these details, and not graphic details aren't there, but then at one point his wife said, you know, look, either get the Swami out of here or I'm going. So then they had to look for a place for Prabhupada, and that's when Mukunda Maharaj at that time stepped in and looked for a place for Prabhupada to preach from, and found 26 2nd Avenue. And anyways, I'm just sort of like setting the scene. Just setting the scene. And one of the things that really, really struck me about what motivated people in these early days, especially knowing the type of people that were coming and hearing from Prabhupada. Not only was Prabhupada, you know, he was, every night he was having kirtan, and he had and Bhagavad Gita class, 3 nights a week, and then in the morning he was giving Chaitanya Charitamrita. And most of the people that were coming on the Lower East Side, as we know, they were hippies. And having come from that culture, hippie culture, and having so many friends from the 60s and early 70s who were part of the hippie culture, the one thing that stood out in my memory about the hippies that was really, really like prominent in the hippie mentality was to reject authority. I mean, that was our motto. That was the foundation of our hippie life. You know? And is anybody who's like an authority, just, you know, forget it. You know, like you have to reject all authority. You know, another question, another motto was question authority. Yeah, always question authority. And I even remember, because I lived in a community of hippies. It was sort of like a commune of sorts. And in 1972, and the way you could live there is as long as you didn't impose your authority on anybody, you could stay. But as soon as somebody tried to have a little more authority over somebody else, then forget it. You know, like you're not part of our, you know. And I even remember when I first started reading Prabhupada's Bhagavad Gita. It was in 1972. And then I made 1 or 2 visits to the temple, and then I got inspired to eat only prasadam. And then I was living in this commune at the time, and in order to cook prasadam, the kitchen had to be clean, you know. But in a hippie commune, nobody cleans up after themselves. Everybody just does what they want to do, and, you know, they come in, they cook, and the pots stack up, you know, huge stacks of pots. And I had to go, and I had this starting to develop this Krishna consciousness spirit that if I'm going to cook for Krishna, and, you know, and I would have to go in and wash the mountain of pots and clean the kitchen and then make a little offering, whatever it was, and then I shared it with the others in the commune. But I could never tell anybody wash your own pots, because if I knew if I did, I'd be out. You know, you just can't, no authority. In fact, a little and a funny little story, a little extra. When the first time I went to the temple, second time I went to the temple. And I had already started this whole thing of washing pots and everything like that. Second time I went to the temple, the devotee sat down and preached to me. And he taught me about a few other things about chanting, and he said, would you like to do some service? So I said, sure. So he brought me to the back room, and there was a huge mountain huge mountain of pots. And I was thinking, oh no. And so I started, and then one devotee, I'll never forget this, one devotee came over to me as I was washing these pots, a little bit begrudgingly, because, like, I didn't come to the... And he just looked at me and he said, when you clean Krishna's pots, you clean your heart. And I tell you, it was like a transformation. I'll never forget. I just meditated on that for a few minutes, and then all of a sudden, I just said, yeah, these are not the same pots I've been washing all the time. These are Krishna's pots. And then as soon as my mind started thinking that way, and the pot room just turned into a spiritual world. And then, when I finished washing the pots, I was asking them, are there any more pots I can wash? But anyways, back to question authority. So, I was meditating how Prabhupada, during that time, here he was speaking to hippies who are all of the same mentality, that reject authority, question authority, and here comes the topmost authority, He just kind of descends from Goloka Vrindavan into the Lower East Side, presenting Krishna's instructions. And for many of them, it wasn't so much, Prabhupada, of course, was giving Krishna's instructions, and he was speaking from Chaitanya Charitamrita, Madhya Lila chapter 19, to drugged out hippies, but what really got people, to take that step of accepting authority was not so much that Prabhupada was a genuine authority, but more than anything is that he was genuine. More than anything else, what tipped the scales and really convinced people to want to do something for the Swami was not that they were thinking, I want to do this for Krishna. I want to do this for the Swami because he's just so genuine. Whatever he does is completely consistent with whatever he speaks, and he walks his talk. He's just like, he's always like, every Prabhupada is just there for everybody. He's right there for everybody, showing his example. And anything he says, he's doing. Even when it came time, when Prabhupada finally decided to tell, the hippies who were sleeping in the storefront that, you're supposed to take a shower. There's hippies also. Hippies shower. The Prabhupada, one day he told them, and then they were going to Prabhupada's apartment. Prabhupada was standing in line waiting for shower. Mukunda Maharaj they were using his shower. They were ready to go take a shower because Prabhupada told them, to take a shower. Anyone else told them to take a shower, forget it. But he was right there, and because he was so genuine, that people became, whatever doubts they had about accepting authority was just, the scales were completely tipped because Prabhupada was just so real. And then, of course, because Prabhupada was so pure and transparent, then naturally whatever service and whatever attachment they had for him was gradually, focused on Krishna's lotus feet, and they made the connection and contact, and then their hearts they made connection with Krishna, and then the inspiration to serve Krishna would manifest and grow from that. But this method of distributing Krishna consciousness, of being genuine, this is what really touches people's hearts and makes people feel like, yeah, I want to. So it's the same thing with devotee care. You can't fake it. You just can't fake it. If you want to be successful in devotee care, the most important ingredient is caring for devotees. It's just this, like, if you don't care for the devotees, it's not going to go, and you're not going to feel reciprocation from them, and it's going to be difficult to get the reciprocation you're hoping to get also, because although it's still accessible, it's still available, because even if you don't care for the devotees, but at least if you serve, Prabhupada used to say, if you're not compassionate, then serve someone who's compassionate. And by serving someone's compassionate, gradually our compassion will awaken within our own hearts. But, so although we may not feel complete compassion and care for the people we have to take care of, it's something we really have to aspire for, to really care for them. And to really care for them really means to be able to see beyond, their shortcomings, their faults, and to really develop the consciousness which is in this verse. So that's my introduction to the verse. And I don't know how long I'm supposed to speak, but I'll read the verse. And it's 5th canto, 18th chapter, 9th verse. Prahlad Maharaj's prayer to Lord Nrsingadev. Svastyastu vishvasya kala prasidatam jayantu bhutani shivam mito diya manascha badram bhajata dadhoksaje aveshyatam no matir api haituki. Prahlad Maharaj prays, may there be good fortune throughout the universe, and may all envious persons be pacified. May all living entities become calm by practicing bhakti yoga. For by accepting devotional service, they will think of each other's welfare. Therefore, let us all engage in the service of the Supreme Transcendence, Lord Shri Krishna, and always remain absorbed in thought of Him. Purport. The following verse describes a Vaishnava, Vanchakalpatarubhyascha, Kripa Sindhubhya evacha, Patitanam Pavanebhyo, Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Just like a desire tree, a Vaishnava can fulfill all the desires of anyone who takes shelter of his lotus feet. Prahlad Maharaj is a typical Vaishnava. He prays not for himself, but for all living entities, the gentle, the envious, and the mischievous. He always thought of the welfare of mischievous persons like his father, Hiranyakashipu. Prahlad Maharaj did not ask for anything for himself. Rather, he prayed for the Lord to excuse his demoniac father. This is the attitude of a Vaishnava, who always thinks of the welfare of the entire universe. Srimad Bhagavatam and Bhagavad Dharma are meant for persons who are completely free of envy. Paramanimatsaranam. Therefore, Prahlad Maharaj prays in this verse, Kala Prasidatam. May all the envious persons be pacified. One comment before I continue. I want you just an interesting point I want to take note of here, which is that in the word Kala Prasidatam, in the word-for-word translation, Prabhupada translates kala as the envious. And in parentheses, he has almost everyone. I guess there's some relevance to that too. Anyways, so he says that, therefore Prahlad Maharaj prays in this verse, Kala Prasidatam. May all the envious persons be pacified. The material world is full of envious persons, but if one frees himself of envy, he becomes liberal in his social dealings and can think of others' welfare. Anyone who takes up Krishna consciousness and engages himself completely in the service of the Lord cleanses his mind of all envy. Manascha Bhadram Bhajatad Hoksajay. Therefore we should pray to Lord Nishingadev to sit in our hearts. We should pray by here Nishingho, Hridaye Nishingha. Let Lord Nishingadev sit in the core of my heart, killing all my bad propensities. Let my mind become clean so that I may peacefully worship the Lord and bring peace to the entire world. Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur has given us a very fine purport in this regard. Whenever one offers a prayer to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, one always requests some benediction from Him. Even pure Nishkama devotees pray for some benediction as instructed by Lord Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in his Sikshastika, Ayi Nanda Tanuja Kinkaram Patitam Mam Vishame Bhavam Buddha Kripaya Tava Pada Pankaja Stita Duli Sajisham Vichintaya. O son of Maharaj Nanda Krishna, I am your eternal servitor, yet somehow or other I have fallen into the ocean of birth and death. Please pick me up from the ocean of death and place me as one of the atoms at your lotus feet. In another prayer, Lord Chaitanya says, Mama Janmani Jamanishwari Bhavatad Bhaktir Haituki Tvayi. Life after life, kindly let me have unalloyed love and devotion at your Lordship's lotus feet. When Prahlad Maharaj chants Om Namo Bhagavate Narasimhaya, he prays for a benediction from the Lord. But because he is also an exalted Vaishnava, he wants nothing for his personal sense gratification. The first desire expressed in his prayer is Svastyastu Vishvasya. Let there be good fortune throughout the entire universe. Prahlad Maharaj thus requested the Lord to be merciful to everyone, including his father, a most envious person. Anyways, it's a long purport. Maybe I should stop. There's more, we can read it, but speak a little bit about what we've read so far. Anyways, this verse speaks about mentality of a Vaishnava. And Prabhupada says that Prahlad Maharaj is a typical Vaishnava because he prays not for himself but for all living entities. He always thought of the welfare of mischievous persons like his father, and he's praying for his father to be excused. And he begins the commentary by quoting Vanchakalpa Tarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhi Eva Cha, how a Vaishnava can fulfill all the desires of anyone who takes shelter of his lotus feet. So, there's one thing here that really captures my attention about thinking of others' welfare. Of course, the essence is that one has to be freed from envy. That a person who's freed from envy, who's self-satisfied, who's sheltered, he can actually think of others' welfare because he doesn't expect anything from himself. That's the nature of being self-satisfied, is that self-satisfied person who's a Vaishnava doesn't simply live to be self-satisfied. A Vaishnava is somebody whose satisfaction comes not just simply by becoming peaceful and self-satisfied, but by being always eager and anxious to please the Lord and His devotees. And therefore, for a Vaishnava to be self-satisfied is not simply a state of self-satisfaction, but it goes beyond that, that he can only be satisfied if he's satisfying his superiors, Vaishnavas and the Lord. And therefore, he's always eager to render service to the superior or to the higher order, coming to him through parampara, coming directly from the Lord through the parampara. And because he has that higher order, his satisfaction comes through the service itself. And because the service itself is coming from the Lord and coming from the genuine Vaishnava who is compassion, automatically by serving the superior order of a Vaishnava, one is thinking of others' welfare. And therefore, he doesn't have to expect to get something in return in order to be satisfied. And Prabhupada says here that the material world is full of envious persons, but if one frees himself of envy, he becomes liberal in his social dealings and can think of others' welfare. I've tried to analyze this and to think of what Prabhupada is saying about liberal and social dealings. And the way I understand it is that a Vaishnava is somebody who can be liberal with others, but he's strict with himself. And because he's strict with himself, he can be liberal with others because others will be more attracted to following the instructions because he's strict with himself. Whereas sometimes there's a tendency in neophyte devotees that in the name of doing my service, instructing others, that the tendency is to think that my service is to be strict with others. And because if I could be strict with others and show them what they're doing wrong, I'm doing my service. I'm preaching. And we may fall into the trap of thinking that's my service, and then we may forget that actually, no, by being strict with others, we can't be satisfied that I'm doing my service, because actually, first and foremost, I have to be strict with myself. But if I become so focused on finding the shortcomings of others and pointing them out, then it becomes very easy to not have to look into our own hearts and to see what I have to be strict with myself about. Why should I be? I'm strict, I'm telling everybody what they should be doing. If we're not careful. If not careful, I'm not saying that. But that is kala. That is the symptom of envy. The symptom of envy, or an envious person, is that an envious person, because it still may be there, I mean, all of us, Prabhupada says, quote, parentheses, almost everyone, I guess almost everyone might include me. I mean, it might. Almost everyone is a law. and therefore, in my heart, and that's why I say this is the verse that I always read to myself. And for me, I definitely understand that certainly this almost everyone is definitely must include me, because I'm certainly almost everyone. There's maybe a few rare souls throughout creation whose hearts have become completely free from envy, the tendency to from the tendency to find fault with others, who are free from all the anarthas, who are free from jivahingsa, from kutinata, from all the other, puja, pratishta. So the symptom of a non-envious person is that he can be liberal with others. Liberal with others Meaning that because he's strict with himself, he's not so quick to point out the shortcomings, the faults of others, but tries first and teach by his example. And Prabhupada even said, example is even more important than precept. And this actually brings me back to my reflection on Srila Prabhupada in the early days of the movement. You study, I mean, I really, really studied and cross-referenced and did everything. And Prabhupada's, expertise, his method for getting the people who are coming to engage in service was like, he was so liberal with them, but so strict with himself. So strict that everybody could see it. When Prabhupada wasn't speaking to somebody, he was sitting on his mat in front of his trunk. He was typing his commentaries to Bhagavad Gita, again, after they had already been stolen. And, and what the devotees always tell, that, Prabhupada was always there. He was always accessible. And he was like, anybody would come in, Prabhupada was, with a big smile, he'd welcome, even if it was a drunkard or a hippie or he'd sit down, and he was right there with them. And, and so, right there. And this caring. So right there. And then there was no question. I remember when Mukunda Maharaj was telling his story, A Miracle on 2nd Avenue, he's telling his story when he went up to Dr. Mishra's ashram. And when Prabhupada was, just at that time, he was trying to get people to start chanting japa. He was giving them beads to chant on around. And Mukunda Maharaj was telling a story about how he was sleeping in the room next to Prabhupada, and then he was woken up at 2:30 in the morning. What is that sound he was hearing? And he listened and listened, and it was Prabhupada chanting his japa for hours in the morning, and he was explaining, that here he was, the Prabhupada was teaching them all to chant one round on beads. And here was Prabhupada at 2:30 in the morning, chanting his rounds in the next room, all the way until the morning. And then getting up and having the morning program with them. And Prabhupada was just doing everything. And because he was such an example, that people would just learn from his example. And then when Prabhupada, he would even, I oftentimes think about, that famous letter what Prabhupada put up in the storefront, from today on, these rules, yena tena prakarina, right? Yeah. Somehow or other get them to think about Krishna by being so Krishna conscious himself, telling others about Krishna, not imposing anything. And then, one day, okay, now if you want to stay in the ashram, here's some few rules that you have to follow. And then everybody had to, who wanted to stay, and because they were so attached to Prabhupada, they fell in line. And even started taking showers. It's like, and it's really it's Prabhupada's method for distributing Krishna consciousness, and it's a method that we have to try to follow in his footsteps, and try to understand that it's, what is it that really made Prabhupada so pure, so potent, and was able to inculcate so much faith in the hearts of those who were dependent upon him. It was not just his words, but his perfect example and his behavior, by which he was able to really change the hearts of others. And that's what really changes people's hearts. That when you see that you're liberal in the sense that in social dealings, in other words, liberal in the social dealings, but strict with Krishna consciousness. And strict with Krishna consciousness means being strict in one's own Krishna consciousness, and then always trying to give Krishna consciousness to others. If you give Krishna consciousness to others, then I sometimes tell this story. I'll share it with you. It's a story I don't speak about a lot. I don't know, maybe it's being video. It's about Gaur Govinda Maharaj, an experience I had with him once in a GBC meeting. We were once having in our GBC meeting, Gaur Govinda Maharaj, we were doing a brainstorming session. And we were discussing, I can't remember the exact details. Actually, I was speaking about this in public just a couple of weeks ago. I was at Gaur Govinda Maharaj's Tirobhav Mahotsava in Mayapur, so I already put it into public. So we were having a brainstorming session, and we were sort of like discussing others on the most important things, is how to be Krishna conscious. That's real devotee care. And if people feel that devotee care, then all these other problems that they expect to get taken care of and dealt with as part, they just become less important. But if they don't get that, if they don't get that Krishna and faith in Krishna, then you have to come down to their level of thinking and start thinking, well, how to take care of this problem, how to take that problem, and then you start thinking, wow, how can I do all this, And then, of course, the first thing you start thinking about, not the first thing, but eventually you start thinking about, who's going to take care of me? So, this is my realization about devotee care, is like, Prabhupada's given the formula, is that we really have to capture the essence of, we have to know what to look for in ourselves being cared for. We have to know how to take advantage of its accessibility, it's being offered to us, and how we're being cared for in our Krishna consciousness. And then by feeling sheltered in Krishna consciousness, then we can be liberal in our social dealings because we're strict in ourselves in Krishna consciousness, and give our Krishna consciousness in whatever way we can share it, we can give it to others. And by so doing, we can think of others' welfare. And this is really, of course, it's, some people may say it's easy to say, but not as easy to do as to speak about. But then, of course, that's what we're supposed to at least aspire for. At least we should know what to aspire for, because Krishna also accepts that as devotional service. When we're aspiring for something, that's devotional service too. That's why we're supposed to hear about Shuddha Bhakti. We're supposed to hear the glories of pure devotional service. We're not supposed to think, well, that's not me. Well, why, how's that? Or sometimes when people hear the glories of pure devotional service, they start thinking, that, how's that relevant, But it's because we're supposed to aspire for it. And when we aspire for it, Prabhupada says that bhakti is a cultivation of desire. So when we aspire for that, Krishna accepts that aspiration to be service. And then we advance. So we should at least aspire to become non-envious and to be able to think of others' welfare and become effective in the service that's been given to us in taking care of Krishna's devotees. A few realizations I thought I'd share with you about my own experience and my own the reason why I feel this verse, and there's more to the commentary, but essentially what I've spoken about so far is so relevant to me, and when I read it, it gives me that desire to become like that. So hopefully someday I may be able to follow in your footsteps and take care of devotees, as I've learned from all of you. So anybody like to ask any questions or comments or anything about anything I've talked about so far? Giriraj Prabhu? Excuse me?
kindness to others.
What itself?
Once
Strictness. Strictness, yeah. I can't hear. There's some fan or something.
very nice point you mentioned that one who is strict with himself becomes liberal with others. But in a material sense, we have seen in our profession, in outside world, like one who is strict with himself becomes more cruel with others. And sometimes that tendency, not cruelty exactly, but sometimes that tendency comes in Krishna consciousness also. And one who is strict tries to relate with others. Now, at what level one of these gets transformed from strictness to liberalness to others' mind?
Well, very good point. Because sometimes when we're strict with ourselves, we start thinking, look, I have to do this. If I have to do it, then you should do it too. And we don't really understand why we're being strict with ourselves. In other words, we really haven't been able to assimilate why we're being strict with ourselves and actually experience the benefits of being strict with ourselves. There's a reason for being strict for ourselves, and it's not just for strictness' sake. And because if we're simply strict but we forget the purpose of why we're strict, our hearts become hard. Because the impersonalists are strict too. But their strictness is because they want detachment and relief from suffering. Right? But a devotee, and Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur very nicely makes this point. I'm going to read it because I have it right here. About the difference between a devotee and the impersonalist. He forgive me, I'll find it. I know I'll find it. Oh, I found the book. Now I have to find it. Okay. I read this last time. I think I gave a 3-night seminar from Bhakti Aloka. Anyways, when he was talking about impatience, he said that those who engage in sadhana desire to attain results. Karmis hope to attain heavenly happiness by fruitive activities. Jnanis hope to attain liberation by speculative knowledge. And devotees hope to please Krishna by their devotion. Being impatient due to prolonged sadhana, some people fall from the path to the ultimate goal. Therefore, a practicing devotee who desires to achieve his goal attains that result only when he becomes patient. Krishna must be merciful to me either today or after 100 years or in some other birth. I will take shelter of his lotus feet with determination and never leave. This type of patience is most desirable for the practitioners of devotional service. So he's saying, like the impersonalists, they want relief, right? Jnanis, they hope to attain liberation by dint of their strictness. The devotee hopes to please Krishna by his devotion. But sometimes the devotee becomes impatient. Becomes impatient because pleasing Krishna may not always be so easily accessible and so quickly achieved. And therefore he's explaining why one has to be patient, and he explains what patience means. That patience means that I'll go on being strict, that whether Krishna's mercy comes now, 10 years from now, 100 years from now, or 100 births from now, I'll go on serving Krishna, and I'll never leave his service. So this type of patience, he says, is required for devotional service. So we have to understand that our strictness of ourselves is for Krishna's pleasure. It's not just for, it's not just to become free from suffering, like the impersonalists who are strict with themselves to become detached from the physical body by dint of their austerities and penances. But it's actually to awaken Krishna's pleasure. And therefore, if we always remain conscious of the fact that this is for Krishna's pleasure, and I'm doing it for Krishna's pleasure, and I can be detached enough to not to expect others to be doing it or become angry if they don't do it. Because that's the tendency. We start thinking, I'm being strict, others should be strict too. Sometimes I'm doing so much, I can't do anymore. How can these people get away with doing as little as what they're doing? We get so disturbed, I'm doing so much. But why am I doing it? Why? We shouldn't expect something from doing so much. It's for Krishna's pleasure. We should be patient, tolerant, and happy that we have the opportunity to have some service. And then as far as when it actually happens, well, that is also understood in the example of like Mukunda Dat. That's a good example. I think we gave that example, that he was so patient that when he was told that the Lord had told Srivas to tell him that he would have to wait 10 million births before he would get the Lord's darshan again, Mukunda became so ecstatic because of his firm faith in the words of the Lord that he heard that I will see, because he had firm faith in the words of the Lord. So his 10 millionth births was reduced to just simply a few moments when the Lord told Srivas, call Mukunda, I'll give him my darshan now. So when will it happen? We just have to be patient. When the Lord so desires, when it will happen. But if we have firm faith that it will happen, right? And don't give up. As far as what stage does it actually happen, when the heart becomes soft? Well, at stage of ruchi, when there's some taste, when there's actually some taste for strictness, but we have to go on serving with the right mentality to get to that point. And the point is that we really have to be strict for the sake of pleasing the Lord. Krishna says, all that you do, all that you eat, all that your austerities that you perform, all that you offer to me, you should be offered to me. All austerities that you should do it for me. Or as I oftentimes quote that verse from Prahlad Maharaj, where he speaks to his friends, he says, oh my friends, you can't please the Supreme Personality of Godhead, even if you become expert Brahmin or advanced in learning, nor by austerities, nor by accepting strict vows, nor by chastity, nor by performing great sacrifices. None of these things will awaken the Lord's pleasure. And the Lord will be pleased only when you have unflinching, unalloyed devotional service to Him. And without sincere devotional service, all these other things that you do will be simply a show. So, in other words, it's doing it for the Lord's pleasure. That has to be our consciousness. I'm strict for the Lord's pleasure, not to become, to do it. I mean, in the beginning we may do it, or as Rupa Goswami says, in the beginning we're strict with ourselves on the order of the spiritual master. And because he's giving us instructions to be strict, and we have to be obedient, and therefore obedience is not really fully manifest form of love, but it's the beginning stage of love. And Rupa Prabhupada explains that in Nectar Devotion, that the first stage of love is obedience. In fact, I even remember one morning walk, Prabhupada was walking with a group of disciples. Can't remember where it was. And he was asking the disciple, the question was like, what is the meaning of love? And the devotees were asking so many different, answering so many different things about it. And Prabhupada said, no. He put his cane down. He says, first there must be obedience. He said, without obedience, you can never come to the platform of love. It's in a morning walk. It might have been Tehran. I can't remember the place. He said, first there must be obedience. So when there's obedience, it's not like our heart's completely pure. We're doing it obedient, and our hearts may still become hard if we're not conscious of why we're doing it. So, but still, we should try to be strict for the pleasure of spiritual master and ultimately for Krishna's pleasure. And then gradually, by being strict with ourselves, we can feel that reciprocation from being strict, because obviously being strict with ourselves is meant to help us become Krishna conscious. And when we feel the benefits of being strict, we share that with others. Share not forcing others to be strict, but we share by allowing others to see how attractive it is to be strict with ourselves. And that's the key. Sometimes we think by forcing others to be strict is the way to make them strict, but first we should try to show them how attractive it is to be strict. In fact, Bhaktivinoda Thakur even says that. He even says that right in the beginning of this same essay. He says, those who possess the quality of daya or patience are called dhira, or sober. Due to lack of this quality, men become restless. Those who are impatient cannot do any work. By the quality of daya or patience, a practitioner controls first himself and then the whole world. So he controls himself first, and then he can control others. But how does he control others? By attracting them. Vacho vegam manasakota vegam jiva vegam udarapasta vegam. That's the verse he next quotes. That when a person is so self-satisfied by controlling himself, others see, oh yes, I want to be like that. Maybe I should try controlling myself too. I want to be peaceful. I want to be always enthusiastic. I want to be inspired. I want to be enlivened. That's the best way to teach others how to become very controlled, is by showing them the benefits of being controlled. Being enthusiastic, having all these 6 symptoms of devotional service: enthusiasm, endeavoring with confidence, patience. And then that's the best way to help others to become strict themselves, rather than becoming angry that I'm strict. Why aren't they? And if we think that way, and we become angry, then we should understand kala. Still some kala there. I need to work on that. I don't know, maybe I spoke too much in answer to your question, and didn't answer the question. Did I answer? Something else? Karanga?
We heard a lot about the Ukraine festival. So I just wanted to know what were the values which actually inspired some of the details which you applied in that festival. And some of those values probably were, they had their foundations in the principles of devotee care. So I find that festival an excellent manifestation of, how value-based thinking could really result in something astonishing. So
I wanted to visit last year, but you know.
August 26th to 31st this year.
Oh, it's happening this time?
It's scheduled, but we have to, there's a story behind it. It's scheduled from August 26th to 31st, but because of the current crisis, not the crisis, the economy in Ukraine, we found a very nice venue in western Ukraine, away from all eastern Ukraine. In western Ukraine, it's in the mountains, in the Carpathian Mountains. It's a very beautiful resort, and it's Western standards. But the owners won't sign a contract with us because the economy is so bad and getting worse constantly that if they sign a contract, they're afraid by the time we have the festival, they'll lose thousands of dollars. So they said that they'll sign the contract on July 1st. But if somebody comes forward, because it's the only camp of that nature, right? If somebody comes forward and with a bid higher than us, we may not get it. So July 1st is the date when we can confirm that it's taking place. So we're telling everybody, don't buy your tickets until July 1st and when we can confirm. But the dates are fixed, August 26th to 31st. I had to give you the whole picture. So that's the whole picture. As far as values, can I tell you the truth? Simple, it's very simple. I didn't really do a lot. What really motivated me to change, to make the paradigm shift of a paid festival to a free festival? One event.
You could give a background.
Background? Well, the background was that we started a festival in 1998, maybe it was. I think it was 1998. It was like 200 devotees there. We rented a small resort, and we invited a few guest speakers to come and speak. And then devotees came, and of course, we didn't know anything else except to charge a fee so that we could cover the costs of the venue, the prasadam, and to pay the tickets for the guest speakers and everything like that. And that's sort of like, that was the standard. And then some of the temples who are local to the place we were holding the festival began to think that, well, maybe that they could motivate the devotees to cook prasadam, to do things if the temple started to, to charge certain things as part of the fee, of the festival fee, and then the temples could start getting some benefit to the local temple that was helping with the festival. And then, of course, the festival fees started to become the standard, that unless you paid a festival fee, you couldn't attend the program, the festival. And it was the festival, and because the venues we started moving into were limited facilities, both for accommodations, what to speak of prasadam, but even for the morning program. And there was in a place where there wasn't even a lot of water. So to even have more people to come to the venue, we ran the risk of losing out on the water, because the water was only working through certain times of the day. And if a lot of people came, then so we couldn't even allow people to come even for the morning program unless they paid the festival fee. So one year, I can't remember what year it was, a disciple of mine from America came to the festival. She didn't speak Russian. And she went to Mangal Arati. She had paid the fee, but she didn't have the wristband on. And she was walking to Mangal Arati, and the guards were there. And the guard said, "Where's your band?" And she didn't know what did you pay? And she didn't know anything. She didn't know what was happening. And they wouldn't let her in. And she came to me, and she wasn't disturbed or anything like that. She just said to me, He said, Guru Maharaj, he said, I just thought I should tell you, that I couldn't go to Mangal Artik this morning because the guards wouldn't let me in. And then when I heard that, something clicked. Just clicked or snapped. It might have been, that snapped might be better. I just said, wait a minute, something's wrong here. Somebody can't go to Mangal Arati because they didn't pay festivals? And I just said, it's time for a paradigm shift here. And I just, at that point on, I just said, we got to change something. And that was it. That was it. I just sat down with the devotees. I sat down with Chutrapriya, maybe a few other organizers, and there was some resistance because some of the temples that were getting a little kickback were. And I said, we have to have a festival with no fees. No fees at all, and just do it. Just do it. And I explained the reason why. I snapped and I said, just do it. We have to do it. We have to have faith. And then of course, it was very difficult the first year. It took a lot. It was a big leap of faith for the organizers to organize a festival. They had no fees because as soon as people heard no fees, then. And I remember one of my disciples, he was like a ball. One of the organizers, like a bundle of nerves. I could see he was like crying in his face. All these people are coming. We're still charging prasadam at the time. We were still charging prasadam, but we weren't charging any festival fees. And it was like the third or fourth day of the festival, and they were like way behind. And they were thinking, how are we ever going to do this? So then, that year, it was the first year, when I saw his anxiety, I sat down. I was giving a class to my disciples, just my disciples, not to the whole festival. There were quite a few thousand people there. I just gave a class to disciples, and I read the quote from Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur from Amrita Vani about the purpose for festivals. There's a very wonderful quote where he talks about the 5 main purposes for holding festivals. One was to become detached, another one was to become attached to the holy name. And it was anyways, I just gave a whole class about the purpose of festivals. And I just told, I never once mentioned anything about money. I said, this is the reason why we're organizing this festival, for this purpose, and for anybody who can do anything to help us through the festival, this is how we're doing it this year. And then after class, people started coming up and emptying their pockets, their wallets, everything. I never once mentioned money. I didn't even say the word. I just said, whatever you can do to help. And and there was, I think the first day, in Ukraine, this is Ukraine, the first day I think there was $12,000 they put on the table. And then with the next 2 days there was $19,000, and I just gave it to the organizer. I said, here, maybe this will help you. And I saw his tears turn to... And I said, don't worry, you just have to have a little faith. Just have to have a little faith, that this is the way to do it. And then somehow that year, they still fell a little bit behind, but I was there in the background, like Krishna says, Ananyas Chintaya Tomam Yejana Payupasha. So I tried to help them understand, don't worry, I'll carry what you lack, But I didn't tell them, I made them sweat a lot. But I said, I'll only do it once. I'll only do it once. And next year you have to figure out how to do it. And then the next year they did it, and they broke even. They broke even. Next year they did it, and the word started to get out that nobody was getting a penny. It just started to get out, and people started to think, wow, this is really wonderful. And the devotees started to preach themselves. I didn't give them any ideas. They started to get all different ideas of how to enlist people to do the services in the background. And then they started to form that little team for engaging devotees to do the cooking, to do the serving of the prasadam. And then they started, and to getting people to give whatever they could as a donation for the festival. And they started to get, more money than they would have gotten if they would have charged the fees. I think it happened around the third year, the third or fourth year. And then they started thinking, let's stop charging for prasadam. Let's do it. Let's just do it. It's their own incentive. I'd never told them. Let's just do it. They wanted to so they stopped charging prasadam, and the only thing is that people started to coming to get whatever accommodations they wanted. We just sort of like the broker between the resort and the devotees, and we brokered. They would just pay for the rooms, and if they wanted nice accommodations, they pay for it. If they wanted simple accommodations, that's what they pay for. They got whatever accommodations, and anything else they would give in donation, or they would do some service. And then we stopped, and then still people were giving. They really liked the idea that nobody was getting anything. And that whenever there was Lakshmi that was left over, they always saw that the Lakshmi was being used to upgrade the facilities for the festival. So that every year the festival was getting upgraded a little bit if there was extra Lakshmi. And there was always enough to start off the next year with some seed money, because you need money in the beginning. That even that pandal, is like, it's the size of an airplane hangar. It's huge pandal. Huge. It's the biggest one in Ukraine. And then that started to become successful too, and it just took off. Now they have over 1,000 devotees who come. Some of them come and pay. They give a donation to come and serve. They serve and they go, and they hear the lectures, and they do service in the background, and we don't have to pay anybody. And it's a different yatra that takes charge of the cooking. A different yatra every year, they take charge of buying the boga, doing the cooking, serving the prasadam, cleaning up after prasadam for the day. And then the next day, another yatra takes charge of it. They do everything. They buy all the boga, they do everything, and the yatra just takes the responsibility for it. In fact, I think I told you that story. The devotee that I went after, the year before last, there was one, because I sometimes go into the kitchen, and I encourage the devotees. There's one devotee, he makes 25,000 bread rolls a day. 25,000 bread rolls a day. It's like just all day long. And so many devotees are engaged in making bread rolls. Anyway, so I went into the kitchen part, and then I went into the pot washing part. And that year I think there were 12,000 people attending the festival that year. And you can imagine how many serving containers there are for 12,000 people, 3 times a day. And the prasadam is first class. And so first class that Radhanath Maharaj refused to take 2 years ago. He refused to take with the senior devotees. He took with all the general devotees. He said, this prasadam is the best prasadam. And he would go into the pandal, and he and I would go and take the general prasadam. He said, this is fantastic, And because that's another thing I told the devotees. That's another little insight I gave them. I said, devotees will forget everything, all the inconveniences, if the prasadam is first class. I said, don't worry. I said, don't worry about if the prasadam is, whatever difficulties, whatever. So they took it up. They make first class prasadam. So I went into the pot room, with his was one devotee who was washing pots. It was like 8 o'clock at night, and the room was like, it was about a third of the, maybe almost like, yeah, the third of the size of this hall, with a sink and with all the buckets lined up around the walls and everything. He'd been washing all day long. So I patted him on the back, you know. I said, Prabhu, I said, is anything you need for your service? Is everything okay? He looked at me and he said, yeah. He had a real angry look in his face. I said, what's the matter? He says, they're only going to let me do this one day. Because that was the format. One day the one yatra takes charge, and the next day another yatra takes charge, and he was disturbed that they were only going to let him do the pots one day. That's kind of like the spirit that, you know, the devotees come there to do the festival, to serve. It was like, it's amazing. But I didn't, the only thing, it was just that when I snapped, that was it. That was the only thing I ever said, and like, you know, this can't happen anymore. And I said that, and I said the prasadam has to be first class. I don't think anything else. I mean, I might have given a few other ideas along the way, but they just took it up. They just took it up. And it's, yeah, it's, I can't take any credit. And even Achyutapriya, he's like, if you go to the festival, he's not, it's the devotee care, it's the counselor groups. A lot of them, they're behind, they organize the whole festival, practically speaking. Some of the temple presidents are involved, but it's mostly like the devotees who are in charge of the counselor groups, and they motivate the devotees in their groups or in the namhatas and things like that. They motivate, and then some people come on their own initiative. Anyways, the benefit the Ukrainian yatra has is that I stay out of their way. That's the benefit the Ukrainian yatra has. I stay out of their way. Let them. They can do it. Somehow it gets done. So come.